Part 3, Rear View America, a ride through encampment, panhandling, homelessness, and poverty divide. Welcome to African Stories by Asada, the Cynic Driver's YouTube channel. Where are you watching from? In this deeply emotional story, a cynical rideshare driver picks up two middle-aged black passengers, Tanya, a former HR professional, and Vernon, a master electrician. As the ride unfolds, they reveal how they went from stable careers and a loving home to living in a homeless encampment. Through job loss, injury, bureaucratic red tape, and heartbreaking sweeps by city officials, they endure unimaginable suffering, hunger, illness, violence, and isolation. Yet through each hardship, their love for one another remains unshaken. A chance phone call leads to a compassionate caseworker named Myra, marking the start of their slow and steady recovery. Before we dive into the story, we encourage you to rate the video and tell us in the comments below where you're watching from. Like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video coming up. It was a rainy Tuesday in Minneapolis when I picked up a couple near the Greyhound station. Both were in their early 50s, African American, carrying worn duffel bags and soaked hooded coats. The man introduced himself as Vernon and the woman as Tanya. I figured they were just another couple passing through, but something about their quiet calm caught my attention. Vernon had the smooth baritone of a preacher and the posture of a man who once wore suits. Turns out he'd been a master electrician for nearly 30 years, licensed, union member, ran his own small contracting business in South Minneapolis. "I used to wire up luxury condos, man," he said, chuckling softly. "Now I can barely keep my phone charged." He wasn't bragging, just stating a painful truth. His fingers, though calloused, were steady. Tanya rested her hand on his. "And I used to work HR," she added, her voice gentle, "at a major health network downtown. Hired nurses, therapists, techs. I knew their salaries, their dreams. I was good at it." Tanya had one of those voices that made you want to listen. Warm, thoughtful, measured. "I used to run workshops on workforce retention and bias training. I wore heels every day, always had fresh curls." I glanced in the mirror. Her hair was covered now, damp and hidden under a scarf. Her eyes, though tired, still held something. Grace, maybe. "I was one of the first black women on our executive HR team, helped develop policy on inclusive hiring. I even gave talks at conferences. They put me on their brochure once." She smiled, just barely. Vernon nodded proudly beside her. They weren't telling me this for sympathy. They just wanted to be remembered for something other than the place they were coming from now. It reminded me how thin the line is between respect and disregard. One minute you're shaking hands in a boardroom, the next you're explaining to a caseworker why you haven't eaten since yesterday. The shift is brutal, and for them, it was fast. It started with Tanya's job loss. She was let go with a month's severance and a letter thanking her for her years of dedicated service. At first, they weren't too worried. She had connections, and Vernon's small business was still going. But as weeks turned into months, and interview after interview ended in silence, doubt crept in. Vernon picked up more wiring jobs, but he was pushing his body too far. One day, while lifting a junction box, his back went out. The surgery wiped out their savings. The follow-up appointments, prescriptions, and unpaid time off sent them spiraling. When Tanya finally landed a contract role, it lasted only 6 weeks. By then, the rent was behind. They pleaded with the landlord, even offered partial payments, but the notice came anyway. They packed what they could into a borrowed van and left before sunrise, too embarrassed to tell anyone. That's when the real unraveling began. They stayed in motels for a while, burning through the last of Vernon's emergency fund. Tanya applied for unemployment, but delays and paperwork errors stalled everything. They tried shelters, but most were full, especially for couples. "They always wanted to split us up," Tanya said. said we'd be safer apart. But after 30 years together, we weren't about to sleep under different roofs. Vernon tried to find work, but employers wanted updated licenses and recent experience. His body wasn't what it used to be. They started sleeping in the van, parked behind supermarkets or in church parking lots. Tanya kept a small mirror and makeup box. She still tried to look put together for job fairs. But it wore them down. The dignity faded. The optimism cracked. Eventually the van broke down, and with nowhere else to go, they found themselves at a tent encampment, just outside the city limits. Cold, exposed, afraid. The first thing they did at the encampment was ask around, where to find help, who to talk to, where to go during the day. Someone told them about a non-profit downtown that helped with housing vouchers. Tanya went alone, stood in line for 4 hours, and left with a pamphlet and a promise that there was a long wait list. They were kind, she said, but kindness doesn't keep you dry. Vernon tried the workforce center. He filled out a stack of forms, only to be told his electrical license had lapsed, and he'd need to pay a fee to reactivate it, money he didn't have. They both visited the library daily, using free computers to apply for jobs. Tanya sent out dozens of resumes every week. Vernon applied for warehouse gigs, maintenance gigs, anything. Some days they got calls. Most days they didn't. After a while, they stopped getting calls at all. They tried calling 211 more times than they could count. "We're sorry, but all shelters are currently full," became the soundtrack of their nights. They walked into churches asking for help. Sometimes they got food, sometimes socks. Once, a pastor gave them a gas card, even though they no longer had a car. "I prayed for a bus pass," Vernon joked, trying to make Tanya laugh. They applied for general assistance and emergency assistance, but were told they needed a permanent address to receive mail. The irony stung. Tanya registered for a P.O. box downtown, walking an hour each way to check it weekly. The little hope they clung to was often tied to a mailbox key and the words, "Maybe soon." They even tried applying for housing programs, but the background checks flagged old debt and evictions. "People tell you to pull yourself up," Tanya said, "but they keep moving the floor." Eventually, they were referred to a housing intake center in the city. They waited 7 hours that day. Around them were seniors in wheelchairs, young mothers with children, men with clear signs of trauma. When their name was finally called, the intake worker explained the eligibility list. Tanya could apply for rapid rehousing if she got a job within 30 days. Vernon was told his back issues might qualify him for disability housing if he had a doctor's verification. Their old doctor no longer took their calls. The process was a loop. One document missing, one step undone, one signature delayed. They left that building drained and quiet, holding a folder of next steps that felt more like a maze. "It's not just that help is hard to find," Vernon said. "It's that the people who need it the most can't meet the requirements. They've built a wall around the lifeline." Tanya signed up for temp work with a local agency that promised day labor for admin roles. The positions were spotty, 2 days here, a week there. One office let her go early after a client complained about her smell. "We hadn't showered in 3 days," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't blame them, I blamed me." Vernon managed to land a part-time maintenance job at a community center, but had to quit after his back locked up halfway through the second week. I couldn't keep bending. I used to teach guys how to do this. Now I can't even change a damn light bulb without pain." At night, they sat in their tent and tried to encourage each other, to plan the next move. But the options were thinning. Every agency required something they didn't have. Every door was locked tight, and winter was coming. They joined a local outreach meeting for the unhoused, hoping to find new programs. A caseworker promised to follow up, but her voicemail was always full. A volunteer gave them a tip about a pilot job program, but they missed the enrollment window by 1 day. "It started to feel like we were ghosts," Tanya said, "seen but not real." They were told about a mobile clinic for Vernon's back, but the van only came twice a month and was already booked.
They walked miles daily, feet blistered, stomachs empty, searching for any open hand. But there were too many in need and too few offering help. Eventually, even hope began to feel like a luxury they couldn't afford. Tanya wrote in a notebook every night, listing everything they tried. "Just so I remember we didn't give up," she said, and Vernon held her hand as she wrote, both of them quietly surviving. Their first night at the encampment was cold and silent. Tanya clung to Vernon beneath a threadbare blanket someone had left on a bench. The ground was unforgiving, damp, uneven, and crawling with ants. They didn't sleep, only listened, to distant sirens, dogs barking, and the wind cutting through tarp walls. In the morning, Tanya's back ached and Vernon's fingers were too stiff to move. Their neighbors were a mixed group, some kind, some quiet, some clearly struggling with addiction. But no one had enough. They shared what they could, a slice of bread, a cup of water, an old sweater. Tanya cried once that first week, not from hunger or cold, but from the smell. "I hadn't smelled myself before," she said, shame in her voice, "and I couldn't do anything about it." There was no dignity in survival here, only endurance, and each day tested their will more than the last. One night, a fight broke out 3 tents down. Vernon stepped outside to check it out, but Tanya held him back. "You can't fix this," she whispered. A man was screaming about someone stealing his shoes. Another man swung a bottle. No one called the police. They didn't come here anyway. The next morning there was blood on the gravel, and the stolen shoes lay abandoned under a tree. That same day, a woman in the tent next to them overdosed. Tanya heard the rattled breathing first. They called for help, but it took 40 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. She survived, barely. No one came to check on her the next day. It was like she didn't exist. Tanya told Vernon, "We're vanishing here." Vernon didn't argue. He just nodded and handed her a protein bar someone had given him. Even food had become currency, given, traded, hoarded, or stolen under the cover of dark. Rain was the worst. When it poured, their tent leaked from every corner. They dug shallow trenches to keep water from pooling inside, but it never worked. Their clothes mildewed. Paper belongings turned to mush. Once, Tanya's entire notebook, her log of efforts, names, phone numbers, dissolved in her hands like wet tissue. "I felt like I lost my voice," she said, "like even my proof that we were trying just vanished." Vernon fashioned makeshift shoes from a pair of flip-flops and duct tape after his soles tore open. The mud swallowed his feet every morning. They took turns sitting on the one dry crate they had. At night, rats scurried across the tarps. Tanya once woke up to one chewing the edge of her bag. She screamed, but no one came. No one ever came. By then they had stopped expecting help. What they needed couldn't be handed out in sandwiches or hand sanitizer packets. They learned to move with the camp. Whenever city officials gave a sweep notice, everyone scrambled to pack up and relocate, usually to another empty lot or a patch under a bridge. It was like they were sweeping away the problem, Vernon said, not solving it, just hiding it better. Each move meant losing more. Blankets left behind, friends separated. A woman named Cora, who had shared soap and clean socks with Tanya, disappeared after one sweep. No one knew where she'd gone. Tanya mourned her like a sister. "You don't say goodbye here," she whispered. "People just vanish." The relocations were always abrupt. City workers came with warning flyers and polite language, but the message was clear: get out. Every new site came with new rules, new dangers. Sometimes it was close to water, sometimes near angry neighbors who shouted slurs, but never, ever did it feel like home. Just tolerated misery.
Hygiene became a luxury. The nearest public restroom closed after repeated vandalism, so most folks resorted to plastic bags, buckets, or nearby bushes. Tanya hated it. "I stopped drinking water just to pee less," she admitted. "But then I'd get dizzy." Vernon tried rigging a privacy tarp between 2 shopping carts, but it barely held. They used baby wipes when they had them. When they didn't, they did nothing. Tanya developed rashes. Vernon's feet cracked so badly they bled. "It's not just dirt," he said. "It's the feeling of being unclean inside." Once a month, a church group brought a mobile shower unit.
People lined up at dawn, often waiting 6 hours for 5 minutes of hot water. Tanya cried in that shower, the first time water touched her scalp in weeks. "I felt human again," she whispered. But that feeling faded fast, once the towel was returned and the cold air bit through her damp shirt. Food became another battlefield. There were days when volunteers came with sandwiches and fruit, but those were unpredictable. Tanya once stood in line for an hour, only to be told they'd run out 5 people ahead of her. "I smiled," she said, told the volunteer it was okay, but inside, I broke. Vernon tried fishing in a nearby creek one afternoon, but caught nothing but rusted cans. They'd once gone 2 full days without a meal. Vernon gave Tanya his last granola bar, claiming he wasn't hungry. She didn't believe him, but she let him pretend. Hunger carved away at their patience, at their memories, at their laughter. They stopped joking. They stopped dreaming. Tanya admitted she sometimes closed her eyes and imagined a warm kitchen, even the sound of a fridge humming. "I miss the fridge," she said, voice cracking. "The hum, the light when you open it, even that felt like love." Health took a sharp turn. Vernon's back flared up constantly, sometimes locking him into stillness for hours. Tanya started losing hair and weight. She tried stretching, deep breathing, anything to stay centered. "I didn't want to fall apart in front of him," she said. "He needed me strong." But the body doesn't care about pride. One morning, she fainted while trying to stand. Another neighbor ran for help, and a nurse volunteer came 2 hours later with orange juice and aspirin. "Malnutrition and stress," she said. Tanya laughed bitterly. "You think?" No clinic visits, no prescriptions, just pain, fatigue, and more waiting. Vernon worried she wouldn't make it. He began trading favors, watching over others' tents in exchange for canned food or medicine. "I bartered with my time," he said. "I had no money, no tools, no strength, but I could still protect people." Even in crisis, he found a way to serve others. Violence hovered like a fog, always near, never predictable. One night, 2 men overdosed behind a dumpster a yard away. Vernon and Tanya heard the ambulance come late, sirens barely cutting through the cold. Only one survived. The next week, a woman was attacked while walking to the nearest convenience store. "She used to braid my hair," Tanya whispered. "Now she won't even leave her tent." Vernon tried to organize a small neighborhood watch within the camp, just a few guys who stayed awake in shifts, looking out for one another. But they couldn't cover everyone. People were vulnerable. Desperate people do desperate things. Tanya started sleeping with a small kitchen knife under her pillow. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," she said, "but I was tired of being afraid." Vernon hated that knife. "She shouldn't have had to carry that," he said, "but I was too broken to protect her." His voice trailed off in shame. Hope came in flickers, small, almost mocking. A social worker came once and promised to follow up. She never did. A job fair gave them both interviews, but no callbacks. A news reporter visited the camp, took photos of everyone, and left with their stories, but never returned. Tanya said, "It felt like people came to observe us, not help us, like we were exhibits." Vernon agreed. We were poverty porn. Still, they kept showing up to community meetings, kept trying to stay visible. They made flyers for mutual aid. Tanya volunteered to teach resume writing at a nearby shelter when they allowed her inside. "I just wanted to feel useful again, like my mind still mattered." Even when her own hope dimmed, she poured light into others, but it was exhausting. At night, she'd cry into Vernon's chest, trembling. "I was afraid I was losing her," Vernon said, "but I didn't know how to save her." Their anniversary came while they were still at the encampment, 31 years together. Tanya found an old pen and wrote a note on a paper napkin. "Still here, still us, still trying." She folded it and placed it in Vernon's palm. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You saved me." That night they shared a can of peaches someone had donated. "It tasted like heaven," Tanya said, "like sunshine and syrup." It was the first time in months they felt like themselves again. No tents, no dirt, no fear, just a man and a woman who still loved each other. They talked about their wedding day, about their favorite trip to Duluth, about how Tanya once made Vernon wear matching church outfits. They laughed real and deep. That laugh reminded me who I was, and reminded me what I still had. Even in squalor, love lit a fire that cold and hunger could not smother. The cold became unbearable by early December. The tent's thin canvas offered no real protection from the biting wind. Tanya's hands were constantly numb, even in gloves. Vernon woke up shivering, his breath hanging like fog in the air. A nearby tent caught fire one night after someone tried heating soup on a candle. The blaze spread fast. Everyone ran, some barefoot, trying to put it out with bottled water and blankets. A man suffered third-degree burns. The firefighters came, but too late. The tent was ash, and the survivors were left with nothing again. "It could have been us," Vernon whispered. They began sleeping in layers, 3 coats, 2 pairs of socks, whatever they had. Tanya wrapped her arms around Vernon every night, whispering affirmations. "We'll make it through. One more day. Just one more." But each one more day stretched endlessly, like walking through fog and never seeing a break in the clouds.
The worst was the isolation. Friends from their old life stopped calling. Some didn't even know they were homeless. Others did and didn't want to get involved. People don't know what to say, Tanya reasoned, so they say nothing. They missed Sunday dinners, the laughter of nieces and nephews, the comfort of familiar faces. Even birthdays passed quietly. Tanya's 53rd came with no cake, no phone calls. Vernon found a wildflower near the fence line and gave it to her wrapped in foil. She cried and kissed his forehead. "That flower was more love than anything I'd felt in months," she said. It was strange how homelessness made you grateful for things that once seemed insignificant: sunlight, a dry sock, a smile. But it also made you invisible. People walked by the encampment daily, joggers, students, business folks, never making eye contact. "I didn't even exist in their world anymore," Vernon said, and that broke something in me. During a particularly cold spell, Tanya developed a fever. She trembled for 3 days, coughing and barely speaking. Vernon stayed by her side, refusing sleep, pressing his body against hers to keep her warm. He begged a local outreach worker for antibiotics, but there weren't any left. "Try the ER," they said, but Tanya refused to go. "They'll just give me fluids and release me back into the cold," she whispered. "It's not worth it." Vernon wept quietly that night. "I was so scared I'd wake up and she'd be gone." He prayed for the first time in years, not loudly, not even with words, just a desperate, silent cry to anything listening. On the 4th day, her fever broke. Vernon held her face in his hands and whispered, "You're not leaving me. You hear?" She nodded weakly. "I'm not done yet." That moment became their new anchor, proof that survival was still possible. Violations from the city became more frequent. They were warned again to leave, told the land would be cleared for development. A backhoe came one morning and tore down the communal cooking area, smashing crates and pots alike. Tanya stood there watching it all, tears running silently down her cheeks. They didn't just destroy things, they destroyed routine, dignity, hope. Vernon tried reasoning with the workers, but they just followed orders. Another sweep meant another scramble, gathering what they could, leaving behind what they couldn't. That time they lost their tarp, a wool blanket, and the small solar lantern Vernon used to read his Bible at night. "It was like losing the last of our light," he said. They relocated again, this time near an underpass. The noise of traffic was constant, but it drowned out the silence that had begun to live in their bones. At least there they could pretend the world hadn't forgotten them. In that final stretch, Tanya almost gave up. She sat under that overpass one morning, staring into nothing. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. Vernon panicked. It was like she left the world and left her body behind, he said. He coaxed her with crackers, sang her favorite hymns, told stories about their grandkids. Slowly, she came back. "I just needed silence," she finally whispered. "Too much noise for too long." That day, Vernon made a decision. He took their last prepaid phone credit and called every agency on their list again, one by one, left messages, asked for callbacks, begged if needed. He refused to let Tanya slip away. "I told her we didn't come this far to vanish." And somehow, one of those calls landed. A social worker named Myra answered. She listened, really listened. And for the first time in months, they heard words they didn't expect. "Come in tomorrow. I think I can help." The night before their meeting with Myra, Tanya and Vernon barely slept. It wasn't the cold or the noise this time, it was fear. Fear of another letdown, fear of more paperwork, more waiting, more "I'm sorry, but—" Tanya clutched Vernon's hand tightly under their blanket, whispering, "Let's just show up. Even if it's nothing, we keep showing up." Vernon nodded, though his heart raced. The next morning, they borrowed a neighbor's mirror and tried to look presentable. Tanya wrapped her hair in a neat scarf. Vernon used bottled water to slick back his hair. They walked 3 miles to the outreach center, arriving early and out of breath. Inside, they were greeted with warm coffee and soft music. For the first time in months, no one asked them to leave. When Myra came out to meet them, she smiled, not the forced kind, the kind that made them feel like people again. "Let's get started," she said, "together." Myra didn't promise miracles, but she promised effort, and that mattered more. She helped Tanya fill out housing forms, faxed missing documents, and personally called a landlord to advocate on their behalf. "Sometimes they just need to hear a human voice," she said. Vernon was scheduled for a medical evaluation through a partnering clinic that same week. Myra also handed them a voucher for 3 nights in a transitional shelter. When Tanya heard the word bed, she cried silently. That night, in a room with a door and clean sheets, Tanya lay flat on her back for the first time in over a year. Vernon curled beside her, staring at the ceiling. "We're not home yet," he whispered, "but we're inside." Those nights in the shelter were quiet, healing. They met others with stories like theirs. Slowly, Tanya's strength returned. Vernon's back was treated. They were rebuilding, piece by piece, with Myra guiding the way. The housing offer came just 2 weeks later. A 1-bedroom unit in a modest building in South Minneapolis. Tanya toured it first, nervous, wide-eyed. "It smelled like lemon cleaner and hope," she said. She took pictures of the window, the stove, even the empty closet. Vernon joined her 2 days later, bringing a small plastic bin with their only surviving possessions. The landlord was kind, didn't ask too many questions, and accepted their rental assistance voucher. On move-in day, they had no furniture, no dishes, just a mattress from a donation center and 2 chipped mugs. But they had a lock, a key, a door that shut. That night, Tanya made tea with sugar packets she'd saved from outreach events. They sat on the mattress and held hands. "It's small," Vernon said, "but it's ours." Tanya nodded, "And it's enough." For the first time in 2 years, they didn't go to bed afraid. With a stable address, Tanya started getting more interviews. She accepted a part-time administrative job with a nonprofit that worked with reentry citizens. It didn't pay much, but it gave her purpose and dignity. Vernon applied for disability, but also found a way to contribute. He volunteered at a tool share program teaching young men basic electrical skills. "It made me feel like myself again," he said. They slowly furnished the apartment. First, a folding table, then a second-hand couch. A neighbor gave them a lamp. Another dropped off a bag of kitchenware. Their little home started to look lived in. Tanya lit candles in the evenings and played soft jazz on a donated radio. "I never thought I'd get to decorate again," she said. Vernon kept the flower she gave him for their anniversary in a glass jar by the window. "That flower made it with us. just like we did," he smiled. The day their mailbox filled with letters, not rejection slips, but actual mail, Tanya laughed for the first time in weeks. Bills, coupons, a flyer for a community potluck. "It sounds silly," she said, "but mail makes you feel real again." They began attending support groups, both to heal and to help others. Tanya spoke at a housing coalition event, telling their story in a room of strangers who wiped tears from their eyes. "If we could come back," she said, "others can too, but they need more than luck. They need people who don't give up on them." Vernon spoke next, voice steady and full of quiet power. "Homelessness isn't a character flaw, it's a storm, and all some people need is a place to dry off." They left that event hand in hand, stronger. Not because the world had suddenly changed, but because they had. They'd survived what was meant to break them. Their big break came unexpectedly. Tanya's supervisor at the nonprofit recommended her for a full-time coordinator position after just 3 months. It came with benefits, paid time off, and a $3,000 signing bonus. When Tanya received the offer, she didn't believe it. She read it 3 times in silence before handing it to Vernon with trembling hands. "Is this real?" she asked. Vernon read it and pulled her into the tightest embrace he could manage. "It's real," he said softly. "You did this." That night they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of ginger ale. Tanya lit their favorite candle and played Billie Holiday on the radio. "It felt like we had returned to the land of the living," she said. "Not rich, not rescued, but no longer forgotten." The money allowed them to pay off old bills, repair Vernon's phone, and finally replace the shoes that had carried them through so much pain. With Tanya's job secured, Vernon took a leap too. He reached out to his old union contact, just to say hello. The man hadn't heard from him in years, and was stunned to know he was still around. "We thought you moved away," the man said. When Vernon explained everything, the man offered to help pay his license reactivation fee through a union hardship fund. Within a month, Vernon's license was renewed. Though he couldn't return to full-time electrical work, he started mentoring apprentices through a local trades initiative. "They call me Coach V now," he laughed. "Some of these kids remind me of who I used to be." Vernon's health wasn't perfect, but he walked straighter now. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined him. Being useful, being respected again, was healing in its own right. People don't just need homes, they need to be seen.
Together, they rebuilt their life slowly and intentionally. They framed photos of their old apartment and their tent, not to glorify suffering, but to remember. "We'll never forget where we've been," Tanya said. "It keeps us grounded." They began attending community meetings again, this time as advocates. Tanya helped organize a winter coat drive. Vernon collected old tools to donate to young men starting out. They mentored a young couple living in their car, offering bus passes, meals, and most importantly, listening. "Sometimes all people need is for someone to care that they exist," Tanya said. "That's how we made it out." Their apartment, once sparse, now felt like home. Houseplants by the window, notes on the fridge, laundry hung up to dry. "Simple stuff," Vernon said, "but everything to us." Evenings were filled with laughter, warm meals, and quiet gratitude. Their joy wasn't loud, but it was strong, steady, and hard-earned. One evening, Tanya stood on the porch as the sun set, the sky glowing orange over the rooftops. Vernon joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "We're still here," he said. She nodded, eyes misty. "Still us, still trying, but now we're winning." They'd survived one of the darkest chapters of their lives, not just because they were strong, but because they held on to each other. They were the proof that resilience, when met with just enough grace, can be transformative. Their journey wasn't over. There were still bills, still scars, still difficult memories. But now they had a foundation, a future, a voice, and a mission to speak for those still sleeping on concrete. "We're not special," Tanya said. "We just didn't quit. And someone saw us." Vernon kissed her hand, and together they watched the last of the daylight fade, holding on to hope like it was their final possession, and maybe their greatest. Weeks later, Tanya was invited to speak at a local university seminar on poverty and housing insecurity. She stood before a packed room of young, curious faces and told the story plainly, without theatrics, without pity. We weren't lazy. We weren't addicts. We were professionals who fell on hard times, just like anybody could. The room fell silent when she shared the anniversary napkin Vernon kept in his wallet. Love is what kept us alive. Love and the refusal to stop trying. Afterward, several students approached her, some in tears, thanking her for her honesty. A few even asked how they could help the local encampment. Vernon stood in the back, arms crossed, beaming. "I always said you were made for rooms like that," he told her. Tanya laughed. "Now I want rooms like that to care about people like us." Her words echoed long after the applause had ended. They weren't just survivors, they were witnesses. In the months that followed, Tanya and Vernon turned their experience into advocacy. They worked with outreach programs, spoke at city council meetings, and helped draft a proposal for a low-barrier housing initiative. They knew what barriers looked like: long forms, impossible documentation, systems that assumed the worst of people. You don't solve homelessness with suspicion. You solve it with shelter, support, and faith in people, Vernon told the board one day. Their proposal passed its first committee stage. It was a small victory, but it lit a spark. Other survivors joined their efforts. Formerly homeless women, veterans, young adults, all came together, their voices louder as one. "We know what the system gets wrong," Tanya said. "We lived it." And now they were determined to help rewrite it. They weren't content with healing alone. Their healing had become their cause, their momentum, their purpose. From the streets to the seats of influence, they had risen. They never forgot the encampment. Every winter, Tanya and Vernon returned to drop off supplies: thermal socks, gloves, hot soup, hand warmers. But more than that, they offered presence. They didn't swoop in like saviors. They sat, they listened, they hugged. They saw the invisible. "You two give me hope," a man said once, tears welling up in his eyes. "You made it out. Maybe I can't too." Tanya knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can, and we'll walk beside you till you do." That was the difference: compassion with consistency. Vernon kept a mental map of the camps. He'd drive by once a week just to check in. "I know what it's like to feel alone out here. It messes with your mind, makes you question your worth." But they were living proof that worth doesn't disappear with circumstances. They were proof that redemption isn't a miracle. It's a process.
Their apartment had become a gathering place, a safe space. Once a month, they hosted comeback dinners, invitations extended to others trying to rebuild. The meals were simple: spaghetti, rice and beans, cornbread, sweet tea, but the conversations were rich: laughter, tears, advice, encouragement. It was a place where no one had to explain their scars, where no one was judged by their shoes, their past, or their current struggle. "We feed more than stomachs," Tanya would say. "We feed the spirit." Vernon kept a list of everyone who came, checking in on them afterward. "Just making sure you're still here," he'd say. That phrase, "still here," had become their motto, a quiet battle cry, a reminder that presence alone was a kind of victory. That in a world quick to discard, staying present was revolutionary. Their home was small, but in it lived a revolution of care, rebirth, and unstoppable grace. A year later, they stood on the stage at a city gala recognizing community heroes. They didn't expect the nomination, didn't dress for the spotlight, but there they were: Tanya in a simple navy dress, Vernon in a borrowed blazer. As they took the mic, the room rose to their feet in applause. Tanya smiled, humbled. "We never set out to be heroes," she began. "We just wanted to live." Vernon added, "And then we wanted others to live too." They thanked Myra, their caseworker. They thanked every neighbor who dropped off a pot or a lamp. They thanked the streets that broke them because those same streets had given them their fight. Their message was clear. If the city could come together for a gala, it could come together for housing. If it could honor the formerly homeless, it could honor the still homeless with action. That night, they lit more than candles. They lit hearts. I had picked them up after the event and dropped them off at home. As they reached their doorstep, Tanya turned and looked back at the city lights. "We made it," she whispered. Vernon nodded. "Not just out. We made it through." Their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to every person holding on, to every couple sleeping under bridges, to every soul convinced they had been forgotten. It was a story of survival, yes, but also of rebuilding, of reimagining, and it began with the simple refusal to disappear. In the silence that followed, wind chimes on the porch sang softly. Tanya unlocked the door and stepped inside. Vernon followed. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time in a long time, the night held no fear. Only rest, only warmth, only home. I pull away from the curb. The road ahead is long and straight. Another ride will come in soon. Maybe the next one will be quiet. Maybe it'll be another argument about drugs or crime or money. It doesn't matter. I'll still drive, still listen, still throw my 2 cents in when I can. Moral lessons. 1. Homelessness is not a character flaw. It is often the result of systemic failure. Tanya and Vernon were educated, hard-working people who became homeless through circumstances outside their control. 2. Dignity and love can survive even the harshest conditions. Their unwavering love helped them endure physical suffering and spiritual despair. 3. The road to recovery begins with someone willing to listen. A single, compassionate caseworker helped them navigate the system when no one else would. 4. Small acts of kindness can be lifelines. A flower, a hot shower, a kind word. These simple things helped restore their humanity. 5. Survivors make the most powerful advocates. Having lived through the crisis, Tanya and Vernon were best positioned to lead others out of it. 6. Healing isn't just about stability, it's about belonging. Their comeback dinners became a symbol of community, love, and new beginnings. 7. Systemic change requires both policy and compassion. Housing, healthcare, and employment reforms only work if we treat people as human first. 8. Hope is a form of resistance. Even when everything was stripped away, Tanya and Vernon held on to the belief that they still mattered. Thanks for watching. Please leave comments, like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of Part 4 of this series. You wouldn't want to miss it.